Hey Lakeland, thanks for joining us for our final week of our Family 30 series in Getting to the Heart. This is something that I am super passionate about, and it really began on a journey this summer as I was reading different books about emotional maturity. Getting to the Heart really touches on emotional maturity. Can we handle our emotions in a mature way, and can we be people that walk in self-awareness of who we are and how we handle things so that we can better walk in wisdom and who God's called us to be? And all of it is back to checking the heart. All of it is rooted in how do we check our heart and get to the heart of what's really going on in our lives. We talked about Luke 6:45 and what Jesus says. He says, the good man brings good things out of the good stored up in his heart, and the evil man brings evil things out of the evil stored up in his heart. For out of the overflow of his heart, his mouth speaks. I think if you look back through the week, your week or your past month, and you look at the ways that your heart has spoken, you might be jarred by what's been coming out. It's so good to take stock and take inventory of what really is coming out of our heart, because that shows where the roots are. And that also shows us where God needs to work most in our hearts. And even though we talked about the percentages of what our communication really means. 7% is verbal, it's the what we say. 38% is vocal. How we say it, that's tone and inflection and pitch and even speed of how we talk. And then 55% is visual, that's our body language. That's our hand gestures, that's our facial expressions. So 93% of what we say is nonverbal. And so when we're looking at our heart and what is really coming out of it, we have to take inventory of everything, of all the messages that we're really sending to get an accurate picture. And what the big idea that we talked about this weekend was that we will never find true healing or true growth unless we get to the heart. We will always be running into the same assembly blocks and the same brick walls, crashing on the same courses if we never get to the heart, because true healing and true growth can only come when we get to the heart. We also talked about anger being a secondary emotion. When I first read that, when I first learned that fact, that anger is not the chief emotion that we feel, it floored me. And I was able to look back on my week and just see where had I been angry, and then even trace that back to what was the emotion that really set that off. Anger is a secondary emotion in that it gets the most press, it's the loudest, but it's not the first emotion that we feel. What triggers anger a lot of the times is fear, it's sadness, it's insecurity, it's hurt. And when we realize that, that's how we can, the truth of what's behind our anger, that allows us to see accurately what's in our heart. And when we can see it accurately and have clarity about it, we can deal with it in the appropriate way. And we can really allow the Holy Spirit to work in the ways that only He knows how best when we have that clear picture of what's really going on. We brought up King David and what a fantastic man he was and the ways that he got to his heart. And he's such a compelling example because there's so many ways for a lot of us to relate to who he was. And he always got to the heart of what was going on. We shared in Psalm 142, and I think it'd be so helpful for you guys to read that together in your groups tonight, to really talk about what he was going through and see how he got to the heart of what was going on. Because it wasn't that he mistook everything that was going on, it wasn't that he brushed past it, but he really allowed himself to feel the weight of his emotions, and then he was allowed the Holy Spirit to really take root in his heart and bring him back to what was true. But I don't know that that would have happened had he not allowed himself to feel the full weight of what he was going through at that time. And that comes back to all of us. Are we just skipping through our emotions and trying to brush past them? That verse, don't let the sun go down on your anger, it's a solid verse, it's truth. But I think the application we struggle with is that sometimes we just try and brush that aside. It means don't let the sun go down in your anger in that we don't waste it. But it doesn't mean that we brush it aside and we move past it. It means that we still are responsible for our emotions and taking an accurate inventory of what is going on there. That's how we allow the sun not to set on our anger, because we're accurately looking at it and seeing what's really going on and getting to the truth. And I think a lot of times in my own life what I've realized is taking my emotions and what my heart is telling me, I would kind of stuff it away because I didn't know how to handle it. And I thought, well, I don't know that I'm supposed to act like that. I think as a believer, somebody who follows Christ and professes the name of Christ, you're supposed to walk in wisdom and honor and integrity. So how does that go in line with all these heavy emotions that we sometimes feel? And I think that's the application that a lot of us struggle with. Do we just push our emotions aside for fear that they'll be the ones that drive the bus? Or do we put them in the rightful space? And they're really just meant to be markers for us, warnings for us to look at, and even yellow flags to say, what's really going on? Because when we can do that, when we see what's really going on and we get to the heart, that's when we have clarity, and that's when we can bring the Holy Spirit into the conversation. He's always there, but he has more room to move when we have clarity about what's really going on versus when we're already an emotional mess by allowing our emotions to run with us or even just pushing them to the side. And I think David modeled that so well for us in that psalm that we talked about in Psalm 142. And then we also talked about the best way to get to the heart is to guard it. That's Proverbs 4:23. Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. If you look back on your week, and I'd love for you to think back on your week and everything that kind of flowed from your heart, what is your heart telling you? And I know this seems like some really fluffy stuff, but it's not. This is a battle plan. This is strategic in how we handle our emotions and our hearts. What is your heart telling you this past week? Were you insecure in any places? Were you fearful? Are you in a season of mourning and maybe you don't even realize it? Or maybe you're trying to cover it with other things? But when we listen to what our heart is telling us, that's when we can have true clarity. And that's when true growth and healing always come through. So we've got to guard our heart. And then we also talked about what that even looks like. What are tangible ways that we guard our heart? We've got to watch, we've got to wait, and we've got to warn. And so I'd love for you to guys talk amongst yourselves in your groups about what that looks like in your week to watch and to wait and to warn. How does that look like for you? Is that something that comes easy, or is that something you really need to make time for? When I first started following what my heart was telling me, that the watching and the waiting, it took a lot of time to sit down and really get to the root of what was going on. But once I've been able to trace those emotions, I'm so quick to call out now when my heart is feeling insecure. For me, it always is anchored in something about my identity, and it typically is insecurity. But I'm so much more able to call that out now because I've been down that road before, and I know the triggers. I know how I normally respond when I'm insecure, and I'm able to get to that root quicker. And that will happen as you continue to get to the heart of what's really going on, as you continue to guard your heart, and you watch and you wait and you warn. That will happen quicker, but it can be a little messy and it can be time intensive in the beginning, but don't lose heart. It is so worth the journey to see what's really going on and to really and truly guard your heart. I don't want you guys to feel like this is just fluffy stuff. I know I've said that before, but whenever I think the heart gets a bad rap and it gets kind of just pushed aside, or there's all these Disney princesses of follow your heart and follow your dream and all that stuff, and that's great. That's fun. But the truth of it is when we guard our heart, that becomes a battle plan. And we are in a battle. We're in a very real battle against our enemy that is out to steal, kill, and destroy. And we have to be mounted up and we have to be armed and ready. And part of that comes with having a strategic battle plan. And that happens when we guard our heart. I'd love for you guys to talk in your conversations today and in your small groups tonight about how you're guarding your heart this week and how you're going to proactively guard your heart as you go throughout this week, because we are in a battle. Thank you so much for joining with us. We're excited to see you next week and continue to dive into what he's teaching you. I don't like that ending. I want you to know I am praying for your conversations in these moments, that the Holy Spirit continues to lead you and guide you, and that these conversations about your heart are something that really gives you clarity in where you need to move forward. He has such freedom for us from not being led by our emotions and not running for our emotions, but really feeling the weight of them and then walking in maturity and wisdom with them. But that can only come when we guard our heart. Thanks, you guys. We'll see you next week.